I get asked quite often about planning, scheduling, and sequencing. Often just sort of put as scheduling. I want scheduling, and I want to talk about this a little bit because scheduling is not the same thing to everyone, and I want to just make sure that people understand the differences. So let's just jump into this. I'm Rob Jolliffe. I'm a Microsoft Dynamics Business Central expert, and in particular, I'm an expert in the manufacturing sector. So I want to talk about this subject because it comes up all the time. A couple of assumptions I'm going to make before we start. If you want to talk to me about this, you're probably a manufacturing company and you are interested in scheduling. You want scheduling. That's what you're talking to me about. And you're looking at a mid-market ERP system like Business Central and saying, does it do scheduling? So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the term scheduling. So let me get into some basics. It's sometimes the term scheduling from a user point of view, when you're talking to me and you're saying, I want scheduling, it's being used interchangeably with the terms planning and sequencing. And I need to dig in and find out what you mean. Planning is a very high level process, but it's way more detailed than what most companies are doing on their Excel spreadsheets. It's not the scheduling of the work for the shop floor. It's the alignment, the planning of the materials and the capacity to make sure they align and make sure you have enough materials and enough capacity at the right times. Scheduling is more granular. Scheduling gets down to the day. Like I want to have a truck arrive in the morning at my dock number 3 is scheduling. And then sequencing is really specific and it gets into the order that I want things to arrive. Not just that I want a truck in dock in the morning, but I want truck 1 at 3 o'clock and truck 2 at 3:45 and truck 3 at, and that would be logistics scheduling, but it would be the same thing on a production piece of production equipment. It would be in my paint line, I want all of these jobs to go before those jobs, in a very specific sequence. Planning is a big thing. Planning is looking at a large bucket of time, and we'll talk about time buckets in a minute, but it might be looking at a week at a time or a month at a time. Month at a time is really common in capacity planning, and week at a time is common in material planning. Scheduling is getting in a little bit more narrow, and that could be a week to 2 days at a time that you're looking at. And then sequencing, you're probably looking at the hours, like each hour, what's going to happen. And it's particularly over the course of a schedule, which is fitting inside a plan. So they're a little bit like nesting dolls. So let's talk about bucket sizes. I mentioned buckets. That's a really important part of scheduling and planning. So your planning or scheduling bucket has to do with the precision of your schedule. So precision is kind of like I'm measuring to the nearest inch, or I'm measuring to the nearest foot, or I'm measuring to the nearest, yard. And in your planning, your bucket size is that nearest. So I'm measuring to the nearest day, the nearest hour, the nearest week, the nearest month. If you have a 6-week sales lead time, and this is not perfect, but it's pretty close to what I would normally talk to a client. That means that the customer orders today, you're going to deliver the product that they've ordered sometime in the next 6 weeks. That's your delivery promise that you've given them. And that means that you are doing planning probably in buckets of weeks. So you are planning your production orders, you're planning your material requirements, you're planning your capacity at a week by week level. You're not necessarily getting into the hour you're going to do the work, or even the day you're going to do the work, because you have 6 weeks to get it done, and the goal would be to get it done a week before it has to be shipped, for instance. And then the shipping department will have the shipping schedule, which is going to be which day they ship things on, and maybe even which hour they ship things in some companies. But the production would have been done well enough in advance of that the buffer between when the production had to be done and when the shipping has to be done protects you from a problem, and the scheduling is really a planning process. If your sales lead time was 12 weeks, then that planning bucket might be 14 days because you have even more time to do it. So that the larger the planning bucket, generally the easier it is to do planning and to run planning. Your scheduling bucket in either of those two cases might be 1 to 3 days. You may be creating a schedule and sending it out to the shop floor and saying, okay, these over the next 3 days, I want these jobs done. This is the priority I've given them. But you're not necessarily trying to get in there and tell the operators, I need this done at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. It has to be done. You're more saying by the end of day on Wednesday, these jobs have to be done. And so within that bucket, the specific date time isn't all that important to you because you've given yourself some extra slack. when you're doing planning, so let's talk about planning. And I didn't get into sequencing very much in there, but I just wanted to touch on planning and scheduling in buckets. Sequencing is very specific, so it might be to the minute in some cases. Planning. Most manufacturers who come to us at Sabre and are getting Business Central for the first time, and it's their first real ERP system, they need planning. They don't need scheduling. They're not capable of doing scheduling. Because remember, my nested planning comes first, then scheduling, then sequencing. They haven't got the planning done. It's going to be really hard to do any scheduling. So the planning is the most important part. And what planning is going to do is it's going to coordinate your materials and capacities within those buckets. So you're going to be able to look at a week and say, I have 200 hours of work in my factory for that week that's scheduled, that's my capacity draw, and I only have 160 hours of available capacity. And then you're going to be able to take a step back and see, oh, the week before I have lots more extra capacity. It's like everything got loaded in that week, and you'll plan it by bringing it forward into the week before. And the same thing with materials. Materials will be planned so that they arrive. Usually you want to design your plans so that they arrive before you need them and they're there, and the planning will just prevent the schedule, if you will, if I want to substitute the word schedule, or the plan, the material plan will align with the capacity plan, and it'll bring everything together for you. So that's material planning, which I've been talking about, which is getting the parts in on time, and then the capacity planning, which is making sure that you have enough staff and resources and machine time available to do whatever it is you're trying to do. It's based on a close enough approach. Again, that's that precision of that scheduling or planning process. You're just making it big enough and you have enough slack in it that you're not going to miss any delivery dates. You're not going to have a problem with capacity, presuming that you have some flexibility and your shop floor supervisors know what they're doing. So when we get to scheduling gets a little bit deeper, like more granular, but you've got to have that planning working before you can start doing scheduling. And then when you're doing scheduling, you're probably tightening up the times. You're deciding what you're going to run on each day. You might decide the order, but typically you're not too worried about the order unless you need to sequence, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And the goal is to get the lead hands on the floor to do some of that production scheduling. So you want to have some flexibility within the bucket, because your lead hands and your supervisors, they'll know that Joe is on lathe 5 and Joe is really good at doing this type of part and he's going home at 2:00. So I'm going to put these parts on Joe's lathe for him to work on because he's better at those. And they'll make these adjustments to try and increase the efficiency. If you overschedule those people who know how those efficiencies work, they know that they already have the tooling for job 1 on the CNC machine, and they'd have to do some tooling to run job 2, but job 3 and job 1 have the same tooling, so let's just put 3 on out of order. That let them do that, and scheduling is more designed for that. Sometimes I call it a dispatch as well. This is the dispatch list for the machine for the day. Get it done by the end of the day, but I don't care what order you do it in. I actually want you to jigger the order to make it the most efficient you can. So now we're going to get into sequencing. If you're able to do scheduling successfully, so you have your scheduling in your daily or 3-day buckets, then you can start looking at sequencing. And sequencing is going to get into the weeds. It's going to get into a lot more detail, and it's going to set the order of the things that you need to do. There's typically 2 reasons why you want to do sequencing. The first one is that there's big setup reduction opportunities if you do your sequence correctly. Really typical example of this is a paint shop. So in your paint shop, there's a sequence that you can do your jobs in through that paint department that's just going to be way more efficient from a setup time point of view than it would be if you just did them randomly. The second reason that you might have is that there's some kind of constraint that requires you to sequence so that you are able to actually do the production. Getting back to the paint example, this is the most common type of sequencing that we see, but there are other reasons that you might be sequencing. You might have a thickness of material that's going through a machine, and you have to do adjustments and setups to change the thickness. So you want to do all the material the same thickness, or you have a width of material that goes through a machine, and you want to do all the material the same width, or width and thickness combined. And doing them together reduces your setup time. So you want to sequence your jobs so they go through that machine center in combinations of width and thickness that make logical sense, just like you would do through a paint shop, because you want to reduce the setup time. So if you run your paint shop like this, like the little diagram that I'm showing, what will happen is at the beginning of the day, you'll run the white parts, and by the end of the day, you're running black parts, and then you wash the machine down, and the next morning you start with white and you work through to black again. The reason you do this, obviously, is because you don't want to wash between every color change. And if you go from the lighter to darker colors, you don't have to. You do very basic changeover, much less cleanup, and you're off to the next color. And then at the end of the day, you do this one really, really heavy cleaning of your station and wash down, and then you're ready to go the next day. Now, an interesting thing about sequencing is that you can't sequence over multiple days often. You can under some circumstances, and others you can't, because the changeover time of paint, for instance, there's a point where your paint will dry if you leave it. So unless you're running 24/7, you can't do multiple days in a row of painting. And if you can, there comes a point where you have to start doing white again because you're running out of white parts. Strengths-based sequencing is different. An example that I heard once, which was really good, I've never actually encountered this in real life, but in my life, but it's something that happened to one of my partner associates, one of my peers that told me about it, was that a plant only had a certain amount of electrical amperage that they could push through the plant, and they had extruders. They had multiple extruders that did plastic extrusion. And so they had to turn them on in a specific sequence and start the jobs running in the sequence and with timing in between them that allowed the plant to stay below that amperage and not blow all the fuses. So as they were turning these extruders on and they got up to temperature, the next extruder could start going. But the sequencing was really important, because if they didn't have the right sequence, they would blow all the fuses in the plant and they'd shut down the lines. The one last thing I'm going to add about sequencing is that unlike scheduling, unlike planning, you might get down to the minute level, or at least the 15-minute level of your scheduling with sequencing, because typically things that you sequence are fairly reliable in the duration of doing them. You know that they need to be sequenced because you know how to make them and you've got lots of experience doing it. And when you are running them, you're going to have very tight schedules, and you want your team to follow those schedules, because if they vary from them, you're painting a black part in the middle of a bunch of white parts, that's going to cause all kinds of chaos. And so following the sequence is much more important, and it's more timely. So to summarize, at the broad level, we do planning, and the planning aligns your capacity and your material requirements so that they're all there. And for a lot of companies, that's a huge step forward, and it satisfies what they're thinking they need for scheduling. At the next level down, you get into actual scheduling of production orders on material, on equipment, and trying to lay them out, and then handing them off to your team on the shop floor, and you let the team then make some decisions about sequencing in real time based on their experience and knowledge, and you're not trying to sequence it before you get it to them. And then sequencing is this very detailed process where you have analyzed the setup times and setup reduction opportunities, or you have some kind of constraint, tooling, something that is constraining you, that's forcing you in order to do it in a particular sequence. So as always, check out the links in the description for any other videos and articles related to this video. And if you like this video, please don't hesitate to subscribe and follow our YouTube channel. New videos weekly. And you click the subscribe button, and you can click the bell to be informed of any new videos. Once again, we're Sabre Limited. Thank you for watching our video. If you'd like to reach out and find us, we are at www.sabrelimited.com. You can email us at sales@sabrelimited.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Rob Jolliffe. Thanks very much. Have a great day.